Hi, I'm Phil Donovan. I'll be talking about the murder of my brother Christopher Donovan to help those in prison to understand how 5 minutes of madness can cause untold misery and ripple effects to other people. It all began, I was at work and had a phone call from my brother who was out with some friends, and he asked me if I was going to join them later, and so I finished work and I joined them after they walked some girls home, and we were going to go to my friend Jill's house, who was a youth leader, and we were going to go down there like every other Friday night. We used to go and hang around her house and have cups of tea, play cards, and just generally get away from our parents for a couple of hours. And so we was on our way walking down to our house, and it's a long straight road, so we've walked it 1,000 times before, so you know, to us it was nothing. And we're walking down and we're having a good time. They'd had a couple of drinks, so they were in a happy mood, and we was all singing songs together. And we were walking up the road and we saw this group of about 10 or 11 people coming towards us, and just as we got to the top of the hill, they opened up to let us through. So we started to walk through the gang, and then before we knew it, one of them had said, "And what?" and all hell broke loose. I felt a pain on my face, and I looked down and there was blood all over my chest, and I'd been hit in the face by one of the guys in the gang. And my initial reaction was to hold my nose, but when I did, I felt my nose was touching my cheek. So I snapped my nose back in place and I fell unconscious. And then when I woke up, I could see my brother lying in the middle of the road. And it was a busy A road as well, and cars would travel about 40-50 miles an hour up that road. And I could see some lights coming up in the distance. So I tried to crawl my way over to help him out of the road, and I was shouting at him to get out of the road, but he wasn't even moving. And I picked myself up, and just as I got to the corner of the pavement, a car had slammed into my brother, dragging him up the road, and there was no one else at that time there around me, and it was just an eerie silence, and it's hard to think what was going through my mind. And it was absolute chaos and madness going on. I didn't know where I was, what was happening, and I was just absolutely confused. And my friend Richard, he came over to me and he was hugging me and screaming in my ear. He didn't know what was going on or what was going to happen. And the next thing I remember was that when the police came, they had to drag him off me, and he wouldn't let me go. And he ended up almost having a fight with the police because he was just so distraught. And he was trying to get back and trying to see how my brother was, and then the next thing I remember was going to the hospital, and I remember being in the hospital, and by this time Mum and Dad were still in bed, so they wasn't even aware of what was going on, and I was so anxious for the police to get hold of them because I felt so alone, and I wanted my Mum and Dad there because, you know, when things go wrong and Mum and Dad are there, things seem a lot better and things would be okay. And my mum and dad had arrived, wanting to know. First of all, they accused me of they didn't understand what was going on because they thought we'd started the fight, or they couldn't understand why people would attack us without any cause. So for me, straight away, I took a back foot because it was like I was being accused of something I didn't do, and I didn't understand what was going on. But then, once all the chaos had stopped and everyone got ahead about them, you know, we started just focusing on what was going to happen to my brother because he'd been taken into theatre, and they put us in a little room, and about an hour and a half later came back and told us that my brother had passed away. And I remember at that time thinking, this can't be happening, it can't be true, and they've got someone else up there they've crossed IDs with, or you know, just silly little things that you see in films happening. You just think, oh no, it's not me, it doesn't happen to me. this is other people it happens to. And my mum and dad broke down, and it was the first time I really saw my dad cry. You know, being brought up, we were brought up to, you know, understand that a man has to be strong, and to see him cry like that, it made everything a lot worse than what it was, because you knew that if he was crying, there's a reason for it. So after that, I was taken to my friend's house, and then the police came, took my statement, took bits of my clothing, and basically just examined me, make sure I was okay. And then that was the hardest day, because then we had people coming to the house, trying to talk to you, and you didn't want to know anyone, you just wanted to be left alone. And I went into my bedroom, and I just curled up and just started crying. And I just remember just being like, although there was loads of people there, I was still alone. No one knew what was going on in my mind. I didn't even know what was going on in my mind. And I just wanted it all to be a dream, and I wanted to go to sleep and wake up and everything be fine again. And since it all happened, you know, there's been a lot of things that you don't realise are going to happen until they do. Like when you're walking down the road and you see a group of people, it's very unsettling, and I feel like I have to either cross the road to avoid them, and I get really nervous with big groups of people. And straight afterwards, it was hard for me to keep a job. You know, I'd be working a few months, and I didn't want to make any close acquaintances because of what happened. I felt like, you know, if I do and they pass away or something happens, then it'd be even more of an impact in my life. So I tried avoiding people, and I just stayed with a select group of friends that I knew from before, and it was just like I couldn't be myself anymore. I had to kind of reinvent myself. And when I went to parties with friends, all I'd get off people is, you know, there's Phil, the brother of Chris. And it wasn't like I had my own identity anymore. People identified me by what happened. So I didn't have my own identity anymore. I didn't know who I was. I didn't even know if people were being friends with me because they felt sorry for me, or if they were my true friends. And made me socially unaware of myself. I didn't feel comfortable around people at all, and I felt awkward with people. So I kind of withdrew into myself. I stayed in my room a lot, and I just, my whole life was taken up with fake friends on the internet who I just talked to randomly. And certain groups of people I did hang around with were people that I didn't know too well, so who wouldn't know me, and I found myself going out of the areas that I used to hang around with just so people wouldn't know me and know my situation, so I could feel normal. And you know, one of the biggest things I think in my life now is my daughter. Knowing that she would never know my brother really hurts me. To have that person ripped out of your life and have it affect everything, it keeps affecting everything, because there's Christmases you don't have with that person, there's birthdays you can't share with that person, and the birth of my daughter, I would have loved my brother to have been there. You know, we were very close, and to have him there supporting me when that happened. And I remember it was a bittersweet feeling for me when she was born, because yeah, I had my daughter, but I didn't have my brother there with me to support me through it. And these are the things that people don't think about. You don't think about what's going to happen down the road, because it's so, people are so short-sighted. You know, it's, if you think about the consequences a bit more, then you wouldn't do your actions. One of the most interesting things about our family was my mum and dad were Christians before my brother was murdered, and I remember we was all sitting in the hospital that night, and we just finished in the hospital and we were going home, and And my dad turned to my mum and he said, you know, as Christians we need to forgive these people. And at that time I don't think I really registered what that meant, and I just thought it was a lot of Christian lingo, and you know, I just thought, yeah, whatever, I just wanted to get through it. But after a while, and certainly a few months afterwards, you know, we discussed it as a family, and at first I felt hurt because I felt it would betray my brother, because I thought if we forgive them then that means they haven't done any wrong, and I didn't understand what it meant to forgive. But when it was explained to me that, you know, when you forgive someone, it doesn't mean that you say it's okay. It's quite the opposite. It's saying that yes, you've done me wrong, but I'm not going to hold it against you. And it was so hard for me to grasp what it actually meant at the beginning, but the more, you know, I thought about it and the more I did want to do it, I wanted to release myself from all the anger and bitterness that I felt. So I wouldn't be where I am today if I didn't forgive, because I would be, I'd hate to think of myself as a bitter person. And for my family's sake, I'm glad that I've forgiven, and I'm glad that my mum and dad talked to me about it and made me see that it was the right thing to do. Because forgiving someone isn't letting them get off with it, it's letting yourself off the hook. And one of the hardest things for me was forgiving myself. I forgave others easy, but I couldn't forgive myself, because I was thinking, what if I stood somewhere else? What if we didn't go down that road? And one of the hardest things for me to deal with was my brother, before he was murdered, said to me, shall we get a taxi? And usually I would have said yes, because I hate walking, and it was quite a distance. But this night, it was a nice night, and I thought, no, you know what, we'll walk it. And I'd just been paid from work, so I had the money in my pocket, and I kept thinking to myself, if only we got a taxi. And that's also a hard thing that you have to live with, the what ifs, because it makes you doubt yourself. You know, you think, you know, if only I'd seen it coming, I could have averted it, but there's nothing you can do. So one of the hardest things for me was forgive myself, and I felt so angry I couldn't even go to his grave because I felt like I let him down. You know, he protected me on that night, and I felt like I couldn't protect him. And I've only been to his grave twice, and every time I do it, it fills me with anger, because I just think I could have done more. And everyone tells you can't do any more, but that doesn't stop you thinking it, and it doesn't stop you feeling it, and it doesn't stop you dreaming about it. It doesn't stop you thinking about it every second of every day. And when I meet new people and they ask me my life story, or ask me, you know, where did I come from, what did I do, you know, I avoid answering, because I don't want anyone to know this bit about myself. Because again, if I do, then I'm giving them something that's not me. It's not who I am. It's part of who I am, but it's not who I am. I guess what I want out of this is for someone not to look on me as a great person for forgiving, because we all have that ability. What I want you to do is look at yourself and take my story and think to yourself, it can get better. And by forgiving, you release yourself off of guilt, off of anger and depression. And I want you to make that choice, basically, and I want you to make it today and use my story. And I want a lot of good to come out of my story. You know, people with these stories should tell each other, because it builds them up, and it gives other people courage to go through what they go through. And I want that for you today. I want you to choose that path that I chose. It wasn't easy. It took a long time, but you know, like anything good, if you really need it and really want it, it's worth working for. And that's what I want for you today. This is the most positive book I've ever read, and it will teach you how to stay out of prison, and it also will stop you reoffending. It looks at offending behaviour and how to put an end to it. Let's get it in our schools today.